The elevator doors opened with a mechanical whisper that seemed to announce the arrival of destiny, disguised as coincidence. Cassius Clay stepped into the lobby of Detroit's Sheraton Cadillac Hotel with the easy confidence of a 20-year-old who had just won his 12th professional fight and believed the world was arranging itself for his convenience, unaware that the next 60 seconds would fracture his identity and rebuild it into something that would terrify and inspire America in equal measure. The lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Friday evening in February 1962, businessmen checking in after long flights, families gathering for weekend visits, the usual human traffic that filled expensive hotels in cities where important things happened to important people. But tonight, one conversation would matter more than all the others combined, though neither participant understood what they were about to trigger. Clay moved through the space with a fluid grace that would later be called dancing, his young muscles carrying him across marble floors, while his eyes scanned the room with the automatic awareness of someone who had learned to assess threats and opportunities simultaneously. At 20, he possessed a kind of physical confidence that came from never losing a fight, never being seriously hurt, never encountering an opponent whose will was stronger than his own. Near the hotel's registration desk, a group of well-dressed black men stood in quiet conversation, their voices low but their presence commanding attention from anyone with eyes to see power when it wore expensive suits instead of uniforms. They were older than Clay, more serious, carrying themselves with a dignity that came from fighting battles that had nothing to do with boxing and everything to do with survival in a country that measured their worth by how quietly they accepted their limitations. One man stood slightly apart from the others, his bearing suggesting leadership through something more subtle than volume or physical dominance. He was tall and lean, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an intellectual appearance that contrasted sharply with the street-smart energy that radiated from his every movement. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture erect, his attention focused on Clay with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Malcolm X had been watching Cassius Clay's career with interest that went beyond sports enthusiasm. The young boxer represented something that the Nation of Islam leader understood better than most observers: the possibility that athletic excellence could become a platform for social change, that individual success could be transformed into collective advancement if the right conversations happened at the right moments with the right people. Clay's manager had arranged this meeting, though he hadn't explained the full implications to his young fighter. The boxing world operated on connections and opportunities, and meeting influential members of Detroit's black community seemed like smart business during a weekend when Clay was scheduled to fight in the city. But business meetings had a way of becoming something more when they involved people whose ambitions extended beyond making money. The distance between the elevator and the group near the registration desk was perhaps 30 feet, but Clay crossed it like he was entering a ring, unconsciously assessing the dynamics of the situation while maintaining the easy smile that had become his trademark in dealings with reporters, promoters, and anyone else who might advance his career. He had no way of knowing that this particular handshake would eventually cost him millions of dollars, 3 years of his fighting career, and his birth name. "Mr. Clay," Malcolm X said as the young boxer approached, his voice carrying the precise diction that came from years of public speaking and the kind of education that happened in libraries and courtrooms rather than schools. "I've been following your career with great interest. You fight with intelligence as well as skill." The compliment was calculated to appeal to Clay's ego, while simultaneously suggesting that Malcolm X saw something in his boxing style that went beyond physical attributes. This wasn't the usual praise about hand speed or footwork that Clay heard from sports writers and trainers. This was recognition of something more sophisticated, more cerebral, more aligned with the young boxer's growing sense that he was destined for greatness that transcended athletics. Clay extended his hand with the automatic courtesy that his mother had drilled into him since childhood, but as their palms met, he felt something unexpected pass between them. Not electricity in the dramatic sense that movies suggested, but a kind of recognition, as if some part of his mind was acknowledging the presence of someone who operated on frequencies that he was just beginning to discover existed. "Thank you, sir," Clay replied, his voice carrying the slight Kentucky accent that would fade over the coming years, but still marked him as someone from a place where black men learned early to navigate carefully between deference and dignity. "I appreciate you taking time to meet with me." Malcolm X's grip was firm but not aggressive, lasting exactly long enough to suggest respect without implying submission. but his eyes remained locked on Clay's face with an intensity that seemed to be reading something written there in a language that the young boxer didn't yet understand. It was a look of someone who saw potential that its owner hadn't recognized, who understood the difference between what someone was and what they could become. "I wonder if you've given much thought to what comes after boxing," Malcolm X continued, his words delivered with a casual tone of someone making conversation while actually conducting an examination. "A man with your gifts, your intelligence, your platform. You could influence far more than fight outcomes." The question caught Clay off guard because no one in his professional circle had ever suggested that his responsibilities extended beyond winning fights and entertaining crowds. Trainers focused on technique. Promoters focus on ticket sales. Reporters focus on personalities that would sell newspapers. But here was someone suggesting that athletic success was just a foundation for something larger, more consequential, more dangerous. Around them, the hotel lobby continued its normal rhythm of arrivals and departures, conversations and business transactions, the ordinary drama of people moving through expensive spaces while pursuing dreams that usually involve money and status. But the conversation between Clay and Malcolm X had created its own bubble of intensity, a space where different kinds of dreams were being discussed and different kinds of futures were being imagined. "I fight because I'm good at it," Clay said, his response honest but incomplete, the words of someone who hadn't yet been forced to think beyond the immediate rewards of physical dominance. "I want to be heavyweight champion of the world. I want to make money and be famous." Malcolm X nodded as if these ambitions were reasonable starting points rather than ultimate destinations, his expression suggesting approval for Clay's honesty while simultaneously indicating that much larger questions remained to be explored. It was a technique he had perfected during years of recruiting young men who possessed talent but lacked direction, who needed to be guided toward understanding their potential without being overwhelmed by its implications. "Fame and money are tools," Malcolm X said, his voice dropping slightly in volume, forcing Clay to lean closer and creating an intimacy that made their conversation feel more like mentorship than casual meeting. "The question is what you build with them, whether you use them to elevate yourself or to elevate your people." The phrase, "your people," hung in the air between them like a challenge wrapped in an invitation. Clay had grown up in Louisville's segregated society, had experienced the daily humiliations and limitations that came with being black in America, but he had also discovered that exceptional athletic ability could create temporary bridges across racial divides. Boxing success had given him access to opportunities and respect that were denied to most black men his age. But Malcolm X was suggesting something different. That individual success carried obligations. That personal achievement was meaningful only when it served larger purposes. That being exceptional meant being responsible for those who hadn't been given similar opportunities. It was a concept that would reshape Clay's understanding of his own identity and ultimately transform him from entertainer into activist. "I've heard some of your speeches," Clay admitted, his voice showing the first signs of the nervousness that he usually felt only before fights against opponents whose skills commanded genuine respect. "You talk about things that other ministers don't talk about." The admission revealed more than Clay intended. It suggested that he had been seeking something beyond conventional religious and social messages that dominated black churches in the 1960s, that some part of his mind was hungry for explanations and solutions that went beyond patient acceptance of inequality and gradual progress toward justice. Malcolm X's smile was brief but genuine, the expression of someone who recognized the intellectual curiosity that often preceded conversion to more radical ways of understanding race and power in America. He had seen this pattern countless times. Young black men who possessed natural gifts discovering that their talents came with responsibilities that extended beyond personal advancement. "I talk about truth," Malcolm X replied simply, "about understanding who our real enemies are and why they want to keep us fighting each other instead of fighting the system that oppresses all of us, about the difference between being a Negro and being a black man." The distinction between Negro and black man was one that Clay had never heard articulated so clearly, though he had sensed the difference in his dealings with white promoters, reporters, and fans who celebrated his boxing skills while expecting him to remain grateful and non-threatening outside the ring. It was the difference between being tolerated and being respected, between individual success and collective power. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of one of Malcolm X's associates, a middle-aged man whose whispered words suggested that scheduled appointments required attention. But before stepping away, Malcolm X reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small card with a phone number written in careful script. "If you're ever in New York and want to continue this conversation," he said, placing the card in Clay's hand with a gesture that seemed casual but felt significant, "call this number. We're always interested in talking with young men who understand that their gifts come with responsibilities." Clay pocketed the card without looking at it, but he could feel its presence like a weight that would grow heavier over the coming weeks as he replayed their conversation, and began to understand that he had been offered something more valuable than money or fame. He had been offered a way of understanding himself that went beyond the limitations of being a successful boxer in a racist society. As Malcolm X moved away with his associates, Clay remained standing near the registration desk for several minutes, unconsciously touching the pocket that contained the phone number while his mind processed concepts that had never been presented to him so clearly. The hotel lobby resumed its normal energy around him, but something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of who he was and what he might become. 6 months later, that phone number would lead to conversations that would introduce him to the Nation of Islam. 18 months later, those conversations would result in his conversion to a religion that white America viewed with suspicion and fear. 2 years later, he would announce that his name was no longer Cassius Clay, but Muhammad Ali, a declaration that would transform him from beloved boxer into controversial figure. But all of that began with a handshake in a Detroit hotel lobby, 60 seconds of conversation that planted seeds of possibility in the mind of a young man who had been successful enough to believe he was free, but hadn't yet understood the difference between individual achievement and collective liberation. The meeting that neither man had planned would ultimately change both their lives and reshape America's understanding of what athletes could become when they decided to use their platforms for purposes beyond entertainment. As Clay finally left the lobby and returned to his room to prepare for the next day's fight, he carried with him more than just a phone number. He carried the beginning of a transformation that would cost him everything he thought he wanted and give him everything he never knew he needed. A sense of purpose that transcended boxing, an identity that transcended individual success, and a legacy that would outlast any championship belt. The young man who entered that elevator was Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky, a talented boxer with big dreams and bigger mouth. The young man who exited was still Cassius Clay, but now he carried within him the seeds of Muhammad Ali, though it would be months before either name understood what that transformation would require or what it would ultimately achieve.